Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Debate Hub. I have Chris Shelton with me today. We are going to talk about the state of Scientology in the year of our Lord 2024. At the very end, going into the year of our Lord 2025, we are still dealing with these types of things, and it's almost like it's just human. It's human nature to just be dealing with dumb things. Chris, how are you?
I am good. Thanks for inviting me back. It's always fun having these chats.
I'm so happy that you were able to join me today. So, there's been a lot that's gone on with Scientology in 2024.
Yeah, yeah, a few things.
And there's been
Couple
like some
things.
some things that have gone really, really poorly for them, some things that have been very, very like exposy to like the
A
main
little bit,
populace a little bit.
little bit, little
And
bit. There are some things that have happened recently that are actually very, very good for Scientology. So it's
yes.
been so I think they're ending the year on a high. Is where I
Really
think is where I think they're at. Yeah.
fascinating. Okay, well, do
Yeah.
you want to tell people who you are and where they can find you?
Sure, absolutely. Okay, so yeah, I'm Chris Shelton. I wrote a book about Scientology, and that's because I grew up in it, and I was part of it for a real long time. I didn't just grow up in it. I actually started working for the church. I got recruited as a teen, and I spent most of my professional life until about 11, 12 years ago just doing Scientology full time all the time. And tomorrow I'm going to be 55, so you can do the math. I spent a lot of time in Scientology, and since I got out in 2013, I've been doing YouTube, podcasting, writing, and work to try to expose Scientology and also help. I would say the biggest part of my work has been trying to not only expose it and interview people and talk about all the damage it does, but also try to help people recover from Scientology and from cults like it. There's a ton of cults out there, and Scientology is just one of many. And after you learn enough about this, you kind of see that it's same to same to same to same. And so I kind of work in the whole cult field now, not just focused on Scientology.
Yeah, I've noticed you've spent the last, I guess, year and a half or so branching out a little bit into politics, a little bit into just like sort of as because you're from America, right?
I am
So
born and raised. Red,
as
white,
an
and blue flows in these veins.
so as an American, I imagine you're struggling a little bit with what's been going on, but perhaps a stream for another day.
Yes, I'd love to do that stream as well. There's a lot to say about things, and I'm trying to now bring. I take a hiatus every year and try to take some time off and just sort of to push away the burnout, and also to try to recollect and figure things out. And that's usually around November, which was this last month. And so I'm trying to bring a higher level of conversation to the microphone instead of just, cults bad, stay away, kind of thing. And I
As,
think there's more to say about this and more about the human experience of it. And I'm kind of into
yeah.
that now. So.
Well, I really appreciate you coming onto a channel called Debate Hub that looks like the Pornhub logo while trying to elevate the
Right?
conversation.
I noticed that. I was like, that's not subtle.
No, no, it's really not. I got Bent Hovind. You've talked to Dapper Dinosaur, right?
Oh, yeah.
Bent is the musician that he's friends with, works with him, and he's the one who wrote the guitar lick for it for our intro.
Nice.
I love Bent. He's lovely. But tell me, so you said you think that Scientology is ending on a high note. So what?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, this has been okay. So this has been quite the year for Scientology because there's still a lot of fallout from and sort of consequences to the conviction of Danny Masterson, who was
Yes.
is a famous Scientology celebrity, VIP, right? He was on that 70s show. He's been in some other things, and he was this actor and celebrity. And he went to jail because he was found guilty of raping a number of women.
Yes.
bad word, but that's what he did. He drugged them and assaulted them. And this was all back in the late 90s, early 2000 time period. And it all kind of came to light, and it took a long time to get into the courtroom and get in front of a jury. And then there was a mistrial, and they had to do a second trial. And that was the one where they found him guilty. And this is the first time in a while that a high-profile Scientology celebrity has been featured so negatively in the media.
Yes.
It was a long case, and it went on for a while. The trial was actually pretty quick, but the lead up to it and getting it happening was quite
taking
a
long time. Say it ain't so.
Yeah, no, serious, right? Like, I think the accusations were made publicly available in 2017 or so, around that time period, 2017, 2018. And it took years for the LA County District Attorney Office to get onto it. Yeah. So he's in prison now. He's cooling his jets, and an appeal process is now happening, and we'll see where that goes. A lot of Scientology was featured in the trial, even though Scientology was not itself on trial. It was, and there was a lot of learning curve for us Scientology watchers or critics in how the legal process works, and how what you can and can't really do or get away with in a courtroom versus what you see on TV.
Yeah, and like what you can get away with, what is actually illegal versus what isn't actually illegal, and how much like the bar of evidence that you need to present, like somebody calling you a mean name is not necessarily defamation, yada 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 yada. I mean, we see a lot of that. We see a lot of that. And then like what does count as consent, because that's a thing that court has to argue about all the time.
That's right. And with religion, with Scientology, there's a particularly difficult road to navigate legally, because you cannot ever, nor can you even be perceived to be, putting a religious organization's beliefs on trial.
Right.
But that often, in the way people are, and judges are people, will often lead to not going into places where maybe they really, really need to go in terms of what actions religious figures, chaplains, priests, ministers, clergy, what did they do? Well, if it was in a church building or it had anything to do with church members, courts get really weirded out and very, very wary of going anywhere near any of that, because of the fact of religious freedom and religious expression and belief. And so this clearly assaulting someone sexually is not a religious ritual or practice or approved behavior in any church, right? But it can get a little sneaky and a little tricky trying to navigate this when it comes to the legal. It's not about common sense and having sensible, rational debate and conversation in a court of law. There are so many rules and so many structures.
Yeah, so, it's a lot of, it almost feels like very, very bureaucratic, and to a degree it very much is. And it's like everything I talk about, it just reminds me of D&D. Everything I talk about. And all I can think is, the 9 hells is the 9 hells are lawful good. All bureaucracy all the time.
That's right. It's that's a great way of putting it. I'm because I'm old school D&D, like first, second, edition D&D, like 1980s, right? So D&D now is just incomprehensible to me. I just don't even understand like what, anyway.
There's a whole new edition coming out too, like
I know. And now anyway, yes, I just can't even go anywhere near it anymore, because it's just so intensely complicated and different from the systems I grew up with that,
Yeah.
But again, things change generationally and all that and whatever, it's a great analogy, because most people, like I think about old school D&D versus the reality of current D&D, a lot of people think what they see on TV or read in books is what happens in reality in the court of law. And
Yep.
and again, they couldn't be more different. They're wildly different.
I think a
The
lot of like
law is not about,
reality TV and like your
yeah.
reality judges and stuff like that are just like
Oh, it's even made it worse.
skewing people's perception. And
Yes.
it doesn't help that there's no like in the early like more required education when you're younger, there's no law education. It doesn't happen.
Not that way. No, not that way at all.
Yeah.
And so TV and movies end up being most of our experience of this system until you get into the system. And then you're like, oh, wow, this is really different from, how they think it is. And I guess in a way, sort of bringing this back to Scientology, Scientology is kind of like that. People hear about it and they think certain things about it and they make conclusions about it. But the fact of the matter is the experience of it, and I had decades of experience with it, is very, very different from, and we try and try and try. I've tried so hard over so many years to communicate the experience of it. But I think anybody who has deep knowledge of a subject could understand what I mean when I say how hard it is to try to communicate the nuances and depths of that knowledge to people who are really only kind of interested in it at a meme level,
I think there's a term for it. I think it's called the burden of knowledge. And it's where you have, as somebody who knows a lot about a subject, you have a hard time in inducting somebody into that knowledge because you don't know where to start.
It can be hard, yes.
Oh,
it can
and
be
you
very
don't know,
challenging.
and their level is lower than you're able to go anymore because you know too much. And
well,
so,
see, now that part right there, I think might be where the trickery is, because I think we can, but I think the trick of education is figuring out how to do that. Yeah, yeah. I think that's
I've also
right.
have Landon. One of the things Landon will say is like, if you know something well enough, you should be able to teach it to a toddler or like teach it to like a young person. And you should be able to explain it in simple terms. If you can't do that, then you are not an effective communicator, or maybe you don't actually know the thing you're talking about as well as you think you do.
That's right. One of those two things definitely will be the case, and it's challenging. It really is. Because people come in with a lot of preconceived ideas, of course, right? And prejudices and biases and stuff. And you have to educate over the top of that. And again, and there's levels of nuance to it, right? How deep do you really want to go, right? I mean, yes, it is an absolutely factual thing to say, and it's really doesn't irk me in any way to say, Xenu is a silly idea, and Scientology is chock-a-block full of very silly ideas, and ultimately, it's really just a money-making scam. At the end of the day, that's what it is.
Yeah.
So bringing it down to that level is not a problem for me. I don't feel, that we need to go more complicated than that. And yet the experience of it it can be so hard to communicate because there are such depths to it. One of the interesting things about Scientology within the cult space is that it has, as a body of practice and knowledge, which, there's thousands of pages of writing and lectures and all this crap that makes up Scientology, there's more tools of indoctrination and control buried in Scientology materials than any other cult out there.
Right.
I believe it is the most complicated and controlling
it seems
of the
almost
groups
like,
that I've seen.
Like intentionally built in a way to do that. Like that was the the intention initially, whereas a lot of religions have sort of the ones that have gone that more culty way. You'll notice that there are churches, like let's say Catholic churches. Pick any one, it doesn't really matter. Just out of my ass. In one side, you'll get churches that individual church will behave more aggressively or more in a cult-like manner than other churches. And so you have a much harder time just painting all Catholics as cult members, right? Because they're not actually participating in those things. You might not believe what they believe, and you might believe what they believe is silly, but it's not dealing in that same manipulative behavior, whereas Scientology itself seems to be like manufacturing, like that's what they're selling.
Yeah. Very much so, and and everything that you're presented with in Scientology has a hidden thing connected to it.
It's all intentional, yeah.
And it is intentional. And once you learn all about it, at that level, then it's undeniable. It really isn't a question. Right? Hubbard was a nefarious kind of guy, and he's the guy who came up with it all, right? And he did it, and he wasn't some kind of a super villain, super genius. He was just a guy, but he had a gift with words. He really could put words together well, and he could write inspiring, boosting, empowering words, and he could give lectures that could raise the level of the audience, right? And be very, very inspiring and empowering without being a Joel Osteen or one of these
caricatures,
cash minister types, right? It was not like that. He wasn't like that. He was more clever, and in fact, there's a quote. I don't know if it's true or not, but there's a quote from him that says something along the lines of, he wanted to fool the clever people. He wanted to bring the clever ones in and show them, and teach them a lesson. So Hubbard had a lot of things going on. He was a complicated guy.
I mean, there's something to be said for wanting to, like, if you can fool the smartest person, you should have an easier time with anybody else.
Yeah, exactly. And Hubbard always thought of himself as the smartest person in the room, or at least the most clever person in the room. So he always, was asserting dominance.
Sounds
and he was very
like fun at parties.
Oh, he was. He legit was. He was the life of the party, right? He could be gregarious and boisterous and tell jokes, and he had stories. He had stories after story after story after story. He would just never stop, to the point where after the fact, people would be like, God damn, I wish that guy had shut up at some point, because he just wouldn't stop with the stories, and he was...
Well, and nobody else's story is more interesting or entertaining than his story is.
Yeah, he was a funny guy. So Scientology comes out of all of that. And I guess I'm just making that point because I want people to know that it's not about Xenu and weird beliefs when it comes to cults. It's what they do. It's not about belief. It's about what people do with those beliefs that make something into a cult.
Yeah,
and
it's about the people.
And that's a really important point,
Yeah. One of the things that we kind of talk about on this channel, we've been doing this philosophy show that's living with philosophy, whether you like it or not. And at some point, we've got to start talking about, like, what are beliefs, what are opinions, and how does that... Because we've been talking about, like, decision-making and how much you're actually involved in that and what that means and how you build a structure. Because, honestly, I think that there is a serious lack of just thinking going on. And, like,
I mean, fair enough.
The conversations have gone, like, people have been trying so desperately in this last year to educate people about Flat Earth, about Scientology, about religious organizations, about political ideologies. And they're talking about, like, this is going to be bad for us because of this thing. But you're talking to people who don't know what this thing is. And they're like, no, that person says this thing's going to be good for us. And it's like, but it's not. And it's like, yeah, but they said it was. But they don't know what it is. And I'm like, how have we gone so far back into the... We have reduced ourselves down to, okay, what is a person? Because we are now having these conversations about whether or not somebody has the option to opt out after giving consent to something. If you consent to joining the Church of Scientology, here's now the laundry list of things you're actually consenting to. Did you read the fine print?
That's right. In fact, you're talking about informed consent, and that is violated 100% of the time by destructive cults. That's literally what makes them destructive cults, is they are not telling you up front what they're going to be doing, what they're about, what their actual goals are when it comes to you.
Yep.
right? Why they're recruiting you and what they expect from you. And if they did tell you all that up front, you wouldn't be part of that group 100% of the time.
Right.
So that's really a way of thinking about, what cults are and why they can get so
Yeah.
brutal.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that there's like something to be said about like the way people view a silly idea and are dismissive of it. And I think it's good in a lot of ways to be dismissive of silly ideas, but at the same time, everybody has silly ideas all the
Well,
time
of course they do.
about
That's right.
everything. Yeah,
That's
welcome
right.
to being a person.
That's right. Exactly. And there
So,
isn't. I think that we have. I think there's, and maybe this is certainly a bigger conversation than just Scientology stuff.
yeah.
But there's a lot to be said, and there needs to be more said about the psychological and sort of group psychology implications of the social media economy and the internet economy, right? The attention
Yes.
economy is what I'm referring to, right? The fact that attention is incentivized and monetized now, and that has conditioned us, you could say, into a different way of consuming information about the world, and a different way, therefore, of interpreting the world. And that has everything to do with shallow versus deeper consumption.
Yes.
Because we're conditioned to get the whole story from a headline and a blurb, and people just that's how they consume stuff now, because if it doesn't fit in 140 characters, it's not worth reading.
Yeah.
And that kind of thing has broader, consequences.
It's a lot of value judgments that have to be made with very little information in very, very quick succession, because you're getting just so much stuff thrown at you. And a lot.
That's right.
And we're not exactly, although we've been conditioned to deal with it, we're not exactly taught or trained on ways to do it effectively. And now,
well, that's the thing. I don't know that we are dealing with it so well, because I think it presents a situation where, because we're there's such a short attention span theater, that what it in fact does, from my perspective at least, is it empowers cults and cult type messaging, because
propaganda. Yeah,
okay,
for sure.
well, here's a point, right? Is one of the points of control of a cult or a thought reform operation, whether it's a cult or an ideological system or a culture war thing, groups will use various tactics in how they communicate and how they get their messaging out there. And one of those is loading the language, where you use special definitions and special phrases and special words that people call them dog whistles.
Dog whistles. Yeah.
For example, that's one example of what I'm talking about. Just one. There are many, many, many uses of language this way. Yeah. And another one is called a thought-stopping cliche. It's a short phrase or sentence or word that encapsulates a concept or idea that shuts down thinking rather than forwards it or invites it. Right. In a cult, in any group actually that is in group, out group, all you have to do is throw a label on the out group, and it becomes a thought-stopping cliche.
Yes.
Oh, he's just a homophobe. Oh, that's just a libtard. Yeah. Right? These labels are thought-stopping cliches because they stop thinking, because the person goes, oh, now I know everything.
Here's all that baggage. I'm going to make all the assumptions about this person because that language. You could even say, oh, they're just a flat earther. Who cares what they think about anything?
Exactly. Conspiracy theorist, right, etc. These labels are used to categorize, but they are overused to dismiss.
Yes.
And shut down thinking, which is a tool that is used purposefully by cult leaders or bad actors, right? People who don't want to encourage discussion, debate, or conversation.
They're just MAGA. They're just a Scientologist.
Want it shut down.
Yeah. There's you can't. One of the things I like to think about, and something that I've been working on, is how do you communicate with somebody who is so categorized in that way. So like if I'm trying to have a conversation with somebody who is a Scientologist and I don't want to dismiss them as a Scientologist, and maybe I want to talk to them about like who they are, why they are, like why do you believe what you believe? How do you navigate that conversation?
Well, the best method I've found for it is street epistemology. And that's just a label for a way of having an inquisitive conversation with somebody where you truly are curious about their headspace, about their beliefs and ideas, and you want to make them a little curious about their
Why do
ideas
you
and
think
beliefs.
this? Yeah.
You know? And it's
Yeah.
great. It's a good method to use, but it requires getting into a headspace, for at least as far as I'm concerned. It requires getting into a place where you can kind of be value neutral for a little while and turn the judgments off.
Yep.
And just really listen. It's active listening. If it's not done that way, it's not going to get the positive result you could get with it, which is they're thinking about their beliefs, and they're telling you and informing you about where those beliefs come from or why they're important to that person, and therefore you will understand that person so much better at the end of the conversation. Maybe if they're a Scientologist, you find out, well, what was it about Scientology that interested you so much in the first place? Not now, but in the first place. What got you, and you'll find the hook. You'll see right away what the emotional, connection was for them to get hooked into it. Maybe they won't even see it, but they'll tell you all about it. It's really quite interesting to do if you can refrain from throwing a bunch of judgment on them while they're doing it. That's the trick.
Yeah, well, and Alex makes a good point and says the Scientologist has probably already dismissed your being an outsider. Maybe, but why does that matter?
Exactly. Yes, thank you. That's right. It doesn't matter. You can still make some progress.
You're not the one trying to make them change. What you're doing is trying to understand them, and when you start trying to understand somebody and they pick up on that, as long as there's you have to have a degree of earnestness. You have to be earnest. If you're not being earnest, people will pick up on that, they'll shut down, they'll get defensive.
That's right.
So if you earnestly ask somebody a question, even if you don't like that person, and you're able to compartmentalize your dislike or disdain for their particularly belief and try to understand who they are and why they're that way, because it's irrelevant about whether or not you like them, and it's irrelevant about whether they like you. What matters is that if you can convince them that you're interested in what they have to say, regardless of those things, you'd be amazed at how easy it is to make people talk about themselves.
That's right. That's exactly right. It's this old phrase, right? There is no one I can't learn from.
Yes.
Right. And it's that attitude that is the winning attitude when it comes to interrogating or, inquiring about somebody else's beliefs, because you got to understand that when you're talking to somebody about belief or ideas that they have of that nature, you are not just talking about objective, sort of balls in the air, that don't mean anything. You're really getting down into who this person sees themselves as, their identity, right? Like who and what they are. And belief is right up against that sort of pillar of ego and, and sense of self. And so it's not just a casual conversation when you're talking about deep-seated beliefs, and people who brush it off or treat it as though it's no big deal or ha 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 don't really understand the nature of what they're dealing with. You're digging into the radioactive core of the person's personality.
It's understanding why people get so dismissive when you confront their beliefs, or why people get so aggressive, or why people get so angry. And the thing is that if you're the one engaging the conversation, whether it's for entertainment, whether it's because it's a show we're doing, whether it's whatever's going on, it takes time, and it takes resolve, and it takes a degree of persistence to be like, no, I'm not here to judge you. I'm not here to argue with you. I'm here to understand what the fuck are you talking about?
Exactly. And you'll find here's the fun part. The funnest part about this is it is only through that process that you can change their mind.
Well, the best part about that, in my opinion, is that you don't even change their mind. They change their own mind.
Well, you never do. Yeah.
Well, they do it.
You never
because
do.
all you're doing is all you're doing is laying the track. You're just being like, hey, but have you considered? And then even if they don't, even if they shut you down right away, if they remember you as a positive experience, and they have a better, or even if they remember you as a negative experience, you'd be amazed at what someone will just wrap their brain around and just run with all on their own. One little idea, one little poke, and it's just like, but what? This makes me uncomfortable.
Well, and that would be reflective of somebody who is already approaching the fence.
Yes.
Maybe they're not on the fence, but they're looking at it. It's there.
They're acknowledging that there is in fact a fence.
Yeah. What's on the other side of this fence, right? And that kind of thing could be going on with them, and they're never going to even hint to you that that's going on with them, because that would be a moral outrage for them. They can't express to somebody else a loss of their faith, right? Or that they're having a faith crisis or something. So they're not going to necessarily let you in on everything that's going on with them. Doesn't mean you can't be an effective seed planter. And that's, since we're talking about this, strategically speaking, it is about seed planting also, right? So you can do the street epistemology and pull their kind of belief system apart with them and see how that goes. Yeah. Or you could try to engage in getting one idea, one fact across, but you got to do it in such a way that you're not turning on their defense, right? Their fight or flight. That people will not inflow information. We know enough neuroscience now to know that, when this part shut down because the person feels that they're in danger or threatened, that's not the time that you're going to be having a rational debate, Yeah,
I think we're sort of seeing that a lot with like the political sphere in America right now. Like there's an opportunity, there's a two-way opportunity where things are about to get weird and very bad for a lot of people. And it's going to get very bad for a lot of people who voted this way thinking it would not be bad for them. And there's people that are going to be like, oh, well, don't say I told you so. And people are going to be like, no, you absolutely tell those people I told you so. And then it's just like, well, it's a little bit about nuance, isn't it? You can say I told you so, but maybe the way you say I told you so matters.
Well, I'll say that I want anybody who says that to remember how they felt the last time somebody told them I told you so.
Listen, sometimes you need to feel bad.
Hey, I get it. And they already feel bad.
Yeah, they're already there. So
it's what I told you so is about retribution. That's what that's about. Yes, right? And that's not part of this picture if you're talking about getting people out of an extremist headspace.
Yeah, if you want to if they're actually in that MAGA group, that's not going to get anybody out of it. I do think that there is a time and place for kind of the yelly shouty man who's telling everybody you're dumb, you're wrong, you're stupid, but I don't think that is a good one-to-one conversation. I think that's an okay way of presenting an idea, but not a good way to approach an individual.
No, that's exactly. I think that's more of, stand-up comic material or something, right? It's like, if you want a constructive venue where people can ridicule and laugh and it's all in good fun, and yet you can still walk away with some seed planting done. Yeah. Comedy is the way to go, right? And that's where it's at. I wish I was funnier so I could do that, because I'm instead of just being so funny looking. Oh, it would be I know. But it would be fun to be able to.
Lovely.
Well, thank you. Anyway, it'd be fun to be able to do that, because, but facts, of course, are the way, right? And but you got to be able to deliver them, and you got to know that the delivery system is really kind of almost more important than the facts sometimes, as far as if you bungle the delivery, it doesn't matter how good your facts are.
Yeah.
It just doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Because we're not factual creatures who feel. We are feeling creatures who also happen to have the ability to reason out a few things.
Yeah.
And if you think about us that way, you will understand us as people, as human beings, right? And if you don't, you will be constantly frustrated and upset with people because they don't act the way you think they should or something.
Yeah. Well, and one of the things is you have to understand that you're not acting that way either.
Exactly. You got to own all your own biases and stuff. It's all challenging, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's such
and these types of conversations that we're talking about having and speculating on aren't for everybody. Not everybody is able to or has the wherewithal or even the energy, and it's important to step back, and if it's not a space that you can be in, you're better off not in the space. Like, if there's a Scientologist in your life and you've been talking to them for years and you're just done and exhausted and they're horrible to you for not being a Scientologist or whatever it may be, LGBTQ, whatever it is, step back. Stop engaging. Right. And sometimes even just that ends up being a more positive influence than you realize. Because you're done. Sometimes just walking away. Yeah.
Well, exactly. Because what you do is, spatially, if you imagine this, right, you create a vacuum.
Yep.
And nature abhors a vacuum, right? So you could suck them right back into, you're not talking to me anymore. Oh, well, and here you're having a conversation again.
Right, surprise, surprise. Oh my, where have you been? We haven't been talking. And it's like, I got tired of talking to you. And then you can have an earnest conversation and you can bring up how you feel about something and say, listen, it's not that I don't like you. Or maybe it is that, actually, you know what? I don't like you. I'm tired of this. And then maybe they'll be willing to change. I don't know.
Maybe. I will say that since we're talking about talking to cult members and extremists and stuff, a rule of thumb here is do not ever lie to them.
Oh, yeah.
And I mean ever.
Yeah.
Now, that doesn't mean you have to sit there and tell them the entire truth of what's on your mind.
Yep.
But don't lie, because if you lie and they catch you, you're dead to them.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It only takes one.
It poisons everything you've ever said.
Just don't even do it, right? Not for any reason. You would never say, oh, I'm so fascinated by Dianetics. Maybe I want to go do that weekend seminar. Could you tell me about it? If that's your line to get them opening up and talking to you, get a new line. Because if you're not thinking about going and doing the seminar, don't say you are, right? You don't want to do stuff like that.
I have this thing where I'm just like, listen, people lie. I don't get irritated at people lying. I get irritated at people lying poorly. If you're going to lie, have some goddamn self-respect.
Well, there is that. The other thing is, of course, when you're talking to cult members like Scientologists, they're going to want to proselytize to you.
Yes.
So the other thing is, if you're going to have a discussion with them about beliefs or about their ideas or something, you need to make sure that it's clear that you're having a discussion, that you're not interested in being proselytized to. This is a personal conversation between you, and setting that early is very important, because otherwise they're thinking with a whole different agenda that they're not telling you about.
Yeah.
And you're not going to make headway with them if they're operating on some other agenda of trying to get you into their cult. And that's a tricky one. That's a tricky one right there.
With my pastor one time, like back when I was like a teenager, and I was like, I had moved cities, so I wasn't going to church, and I was already kind of not in the church anymore anyway. And the pastor of the church, who was friends of the family, asked to talk to me, like called me on the phone. And I was like, what? What do you... And he's like, do you want to just have like a conversation? I was like, sure. He did not want to have a conversation with me. I went and I had tried to have a conversation, but he started throwing at me like I'm like 19, maybe I was 20, if that. And he's throwing these things at me like that are like these ridiculous theological questions about life, the world, and everything. And I'm like, I just got off of a 12-hour shift. I want a beer? Like, why are you... I don't know why sins are sins and what morality is without God. Like, leave me alone. I'm not here
Yeah,
to
not
have a
exactly.
debate with you.
Didn't exactly set up the
No.
conversation very well, did he?
No, no, it was actually very amusing. I had a great time. I don't think he had a very good time.
Nah, no. Yeah, you don't want to get into a proselytizing kind of thing, right? And
No.
so that's another piece of advice on that. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, Scientology, it's interesting stuff. I will certainly say that.
Yeah. So you were saying that you thought it was that going into 2025 they're on a high note, but all we talked about so
Yeah,
far was that they had been
Masterson.
to law. The law has
Yeah,
been like trying to figure out how to deal with them, and some things they're not willing to touch, and some things that they should be hitting on harder, perhaps.
exactly. That basically 2024 has been the fallout of that case, right? Masterson went to prison, and
Mm-hmm.
there have been some civil lawsuits. The
Yes.
victims of Masterson have filed a civil lawsuit against the Church of Scientology and Danny
Mm-hmm.
Masterson for the stalking and harassment that they received from the church
Yeah.
as a result of them bringing charges against Masterson, right? So the criminal case is now settled, but these civil cases are still out there.
Right.
And also, Leah Remini has filed suit against the Church of Scientology for stalking and harassment against her.
Right.
And these civil lawsuits are not criminal cases, they're civil. And so, very different set of rules, very different set of laws. And
Yeah.
those are cases that go on for years, and so those are just kind of dragging along this year
Those are the
is
types
kind
of
of what's been
cases that
happening.
people are like, this is obvious. Why is this taking so long? And it's just
uh,
because it's the legal process, and the legal process is never obvious.
no, nor is it ever short. You are
Mm-hmm.
not guaranteed a quick and speedy trial in civil court. That's criminal cases. So
Yes.
and civil just drags out and drags out before it even gets to trial. You have all this pre-trial stuff, and that's where these things tend to linger for years and consume an awful lot of money, which is one of
Yes.
the biggest reasons why ex-cult members can't really afford to bring suits against their former cults, is they can't get a prosecutor to criminally go after them
Yep.
because the lack of evidence or whatever. And so then they bring a civil case, and the cults usually have so much money, especially Scientology, that they just drag their heels in court and file delay after delay, and motion after motion and hearing after hearing, just to drag it out and cost the victim more and more and more money.
Yeah, which
So
is
that
considered a
has been
legitimate tactic by by
oh,
some lawyers. Yeah.
it's legit all over corporate law. This is
Yep.
just par for the course, and Scientology is a real trendsetter when it comes to this kind of thing. They've been doing
Right.
it for
Right.
years and
Yeah.
years.
Yeah.
So 2024 is no different. And I guess I'm just kind of saying that was sort of what was happening for most of the year when it came to Scientology. There has been certain degree of exposure in the UK. There's a pretty vigorous activist over there. His name's Alex, and he really goes to town protesting Scientology over there and trying to get the government involved. But it's on the government point that Scientology has actually had a real sea change this year, and it's come late in the year. There are high-level Scientologists who have gotten or paid their way into MAGA's good graces. And
Ah.
Scientology is a group that is dogmatically pretty quote unquote politically conservative. Really, we would say more libertarian leanings, very conspiratorial thinking,
Yeah.
very simple minded ideological thinking goes on in Scientology. They're not complicated thinkers when it comes to politics.
Right.
Hubbard was very simple. I don't want to pay taxes. I don't want the oversight of the government. Leave me the hell alone. And that attitude is all throughout Scientology.
Right.
Not that the opposite end of that is any good either. I mean, nobody wants government overreach and government in every part of their lives, but Scientology is specifically get that stuff away from me, and very much along the lines of the government is incompetent. They have no idea at all what they are doing. And so as a result, they make a mess out of everything. And it's lacking Scientology's organizational policies and
there's the
beliefs,
other half of it, right? It's like, I
right?
think a lot
That's
of
what'll
people will
fix
agree
everything.
that's
Yeah.
the thing, right? It's so
if
easy
they
to just
just
say,
gave
oh,
it
well,
to
the
us.
government doesn't know what they're doing. That, to me,
Right.
is lazy. You're selling something. If you tell me the government doesn't know what it's doing, it's like, okay, about what? In what policy? What thing? What was this supposed to do that it didn't do? Or are you talking about somebody is taking advantage of a loophole that was in a government thing that wasn't even intended? Is that the incompetent part you're talking about? Like,
Yeah.
I'll throw
No, it's
something.
all very silly. And Scientology
Yeah.
has made it out for many, many years now, decades, in fact, that there have been government conspiracies and operations engaged against the Church of Scientology. And the belief idea here is that Scientologists, okay, you got to truly understand this. I mean, this is really, really core for Scientologists, is that they really believe that they have their hands on a methodology, a system of practice, not just belief, but practice, that if enacted around the world would improve everything and make everything better and make all the problems of the world, poverty, criminality, illiteracy, war specifically. These are named goals in Scientology to get rid of. We don't want any more war, insanity, criminality, or illiteracy.
Right.
And those are really great goals, but they believe that the only way to enact those goals is to use L. Ron Hubbard's methods at every level of society and literally reform society itself to be a mirror of how Scientology organizes itself.
Right.
This is dogmatic in Scientology. This isn't like a nice idea a couple of them have. Right. It's in the materials. So that's the attitude. And so if they can make inroads into government, and there have been Scientology politicians, very, very few of them, but there have been a couple. Sonny Bono, Cher's old husband, the guy, he's dead now. He was a U.S. senator. He was a Scientologist. This is back in the 70s. Right. So inroads have been made in the past, and with the Trump administration, the first administration, there were efforts by high-level Scientologists to get involved. Trump even retweeted one of the Scientologist tweets, right? And
I remember that.
And there was a negative pushback to Trump from that because she was a Scientologist. So that didn't really go very far. And she was on her way into, her name was Joy Vila, by the way. She was on her way into the White House and going to be kind of connected with that administration. But Scientology actually itself fumbled the ball. In a kind of weird and interesting way, but they just messed it up, right? Because they're very control freaky. And they wanted too much control over something that they really can't control.
Too much, too fast.
So, yeah, very much. So this time around, a man named Grant Cardone, who is a very rich real estate developer, mogul kind of guy, and he's really big on selling to tech bro type people who want to come up the line, real estate bros and people who want to make billions and millions and all this kind of thing. That's his shtick. And
just the worst. Got it.
Grant's a wonderful man. So a real prize of humanity. And so he is also an OT level 8 Scientologist. He's as high as you can go. There is no level above that. He is at the top of the Scientology ladder as far as paying his money, doing all the things you can do, and going all the way to the top of spiritual awareness and enlightenment, right? And so he's peak Scientologist. He also spoke at Madison Square Gardens at Trump's rally right before the election.
Great.
And he got all the way on the stage.
That was the one that Dr. Phil was at, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, because I'm talking about that with Jeff Holiday soon as well, so I'm probably going to bring that up to him as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. No, Grant was there, and he was there because he and his wife Elena had crowdsourced funded over $1 million for Trump's legal fees because they wanted to support, their candidate.
Their foot in the door.
for all of these, how did they put it? Basically, just the corrupt legal system that was going after Donald Trump needed to be shown a lesson, right?
With
and
the
Trump
bad
needed help.
government
So,
not knowing what it's doing.
yeah. So they went after that, and they got into the Trump spotlight. And it now, I am not in any way implying that there are Scientologists in the White House right now, or that they're one step away or anything. These wheels move a lot slower than that. But the inroads are being made again, and this time they're not being made by the likes of Joy Villa, who really didn't have any idea what the hell she was doing. Her claim to fame was wearing controversial dresses and getting photo ops and getting her name, splattered in tabloids as a result. Grant Cardone's a little bit more high level, a little bit more of a serious player.
Be able to schmooze.
Very, very, very high-powered schmoozer.
Yeah.
Like legit, like the guy gets into circles he wants to get into. And he's, I'm not saying he's like, this savvy political operator. He's not. He's just a high level, rich Scientologist. Yeah. But my point in all of this is that these inroads and the attitude of the Trump administration, Project 2025, which you've read literally cover to cover, all of those other things, this is an administration that is very, very friendly to cults because not that Donald Trump loves Scientology. Let me clarify what I mean is on a legal system, public policy level.
Yeah.
If we have been, and what I mean by all of this is we have been looking at and trying to get the IRS, the DOJ, the FBI, anybody in law enforcement at the federal level to look critically at the Church of Scientology or some of these other cults, the Mormons, the Moonies, any of these groups, and prosecute them similarly to what
get
was
some work done. Yeah.
Yeah, like what was done with Keith Raniere, with NXIVM a few years ago, right, during Me Too. That was a big thing. They took a cult leader down and actually disestablished a cult. That's a big deal and not easy to do. Right. It was a confluence of events that made that happen, most specifically Me Too. If Me Too hadn't been happening as a social movement, Keith Raniere would not have been extradited from Mexico and gone after by the FBI. It was a confluence of things, and it just so happened to be a sex trafficking case. So high profile, New York Times was, ran a story on it, and it all kind of came together. Yep. But that prosecution had been sitting in the DA's office in New York State since 2012. Yeah. Yeah. So you need political will to drive cases at a federal level. This is just how it is. It's not because I say that's how it is. I just observe this. It's just obvious. Yeah. The IRS capitulated to the Church of Scientology back in 1993 and gave them their tax exemption status back after decades of war with them, going all the way back to the 1960s. Right. The church was not tax exempt through late 60s, all through the 70s, and all through the 80s. But in 1993, they got it back after doing battle with the IRS for years. Yeah. And they shouldn't have. The IRS actually violated Supreme Court law in doing what they did. Yeah. But they did it anyway, right? There's actually a case on the books where, that shouldn't have happened. Yeah. All of this to say that the government and the IRS were a little exhausted by Scientology.
They didn't know what they were doing, and they need to be taken down.
Yeah. So they were done, right? And if you look at the history of Scientology going back to the 60s, you will see that the Australian government, the UK government, the Canadian government, and the US government all took their best shots at Scientology. Mm-hmm. It was actually banned in in one or two states in Australia in the 60s, right? Yep. You can't do stuff like that. That is a clear violation of religious freedom. So they took their best shot. They took their tax exemption away in America. They banned them in Australia. They did all this stuff. They kicked Hubbard out of the UK. I mean, there were actions taken. Scientology didn't go anywhere. It just kept going, right?
That's not how you deal with beliefs.
Unfortunately, it's not. And we had to learn that. but that's what we've learned is that's not the way to deal with them. So instead, what you have to do is regulate them. And we have no regulations about this, especially when they become religious entities.
Right.
And so I'm saying all of this only to go to the place of, so when you look at the Trump administration coming into office now and over the next many years, you see a disestablishment, tear it all down attitude coming from a populist post-truth movement.
Right.
And that's not conservatism any more than liberalism is conservatism. It's its own thing. It's a very different thing than traditional left-right, red versus blue. This is a populist movement, and it's about tearing things down and tearing things apart. So they are in no way, shape, or form interested in prosecution of cults.
No.
If anything, they want to tear down the separation of church and state and move things more theocratic.
Yes.
Donald Trump doesn't care about that, but there's an awful lot of people behind Project 2025 who do.
Yes.
And that kind of thinking is in this administration, and it's not a small part of this administration.
No. It's like, it's a good portion of like what this administration is about. Like, you have to kind of ignore Trump, because like Trump's motivation is to not go to jail and not be prosecuted. That's his motivation. His motivation is to basically save his own life, and like whatever is left of his assets. The people backing him and utilizing him in this way and taking advantage of his position and mostly his name to put, like, think of him like a figurehead. And because he doesn't really care. Like, he doesn't understand policy. He doesn't know. He'll just gonna say whatever he thinks people want to hear at the time, or thinks will get him the most attention at the time. And like, he's usually actually pretty good at picking out what those things are. But like, the people who are voting for Trump, a lot of them didn't even want to vote for Trump. They were like, I don't like Trump, but the establishment, but I don't agree with this thing that he did, and but this, and this. So they have these excuses as to why it's Trump, because Trump isn't the important part. The movement is the important part. The fact that this movement has any kind of momentum. How many times Black Lives Matter, the 1%, how many times have there been like these beginnings of the startup of a movement only for it to fall flat? Because there's no figurehead, there's no leader, there's nobody actually being like, no, these are our ideals, these are what we want. As opposed to with Trump, they've got a guy.
Yeah, it is definitely a collection of,
it's crazy,
very interesting people doing very interesting things. We can certainly say that.
Yeah, I don't mean to say that they have like things in, like, their ideals are in common. What I mean to say is that you have a group of people that are disenfranchised, that are frustrated, they don't like the way the system is working, and that the system is harming them, and they want to do something. Well, now you're talking about
his base.
Yes. Yeah.
Right, because his base is one thing, and his administration is a different thing, very different thing, right?
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
Very few people in Trump's orbit or vicinity are people who believe in him as a person, and very, very much I agree with you as far as the figurehead aspect of it goes. There's a lot of people who are using this rocket ride for their own purposes, you could say.
Yeah.
I think that's what we're talking about, right?
Yeah.
The base of followers, the voters, the voter base is a spectrum, and I think you're absolutely right that there's a good chunk of people there who held their nose and did the vote because of certain principles that they hold, or certain ideas that they have about the fact that whatever has been going on. I mentioned it's a populist kind of disestablishment thing, because the attitude is, well, I don't really care who's in charge. Whatever the hell they're doing ain't working, and I'm sick and fucking tired of it, right?
Yeah.
I'm so tired of it that I will take anything over what has been going on. And that, I believe, is the product of an awful lot of things. I think there's not just one blame or source or even two. I think there's a lot of things that go into that stew of disaffection with our country.
Yes.
And a sort of, I have to hit the reset button because anything would be better than this.
Yeah. Plus,
and the fact of the matter is that
like, propaganda.
People who do that don't know what how bad things can get.
Yes. Oh yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
they're just
Absolutely.
sick of being inconvenienced.
Sometimes, yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
You know,
Yeah.
and if you
They
look
vote
at the
against
word,
their best interest, yeah.
well, it's a funny thing because that phrase has been called out as, voting against their best interest, right? Has been called out recently in a thoughtful piece that I read the other day about the attitude problem with that statement.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And it speaks to an interesting thing. I know we are totally not doing a show on this. I don't even know totally how we got to this, but it's not.
Organically.
Yeah, there's a little bit of an attitude problem on the left with some
Yes.
condescending
Yes.
arrogance, right? And a little bit of an I know what's going on and none of you fucking people do, and I'm going to tell you and I'm going to judge you cuz none of you people really know. And the people on the left don't even see it, or if they do, they think it doesn't come across in the way they talk, and it does.
Yeah.
And this is one of the problems
Pretending
of
that
this,
people on the left don't also vote against their own interest is
exactly
stupid. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right. And you come to find, if you start really digging into this, that it's more a phenomenon of a lot of the crises we face right now is not because people don't have solutions and are not desperately trying to enact them. It's because voters won't vote them into place because of this phenomena called "not in my backyard."
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, I want affordable housing, but not here because that's going to drive the property values of my house down.
Yeah.
So do it over there, right? I want the homeless to be housed, just not in my backyard, right? I want people to have equal rights, but not in my backyard. I want the immigrants to be settled or refugees to be settled somewhere, but not in my backyard.
Yeah.
And this is our bad. This is not the bad of our leadership. This is our bad that we do this. And this is it's a problem. It's a whole different problem from the cult problem, but it's a very, very big problem in our country.
I would like to introduce everyone to the concept of the benevolent tyrant. Sorry, go ahead.
A little bit, right? We get these attitudes of, oh, I'm empathetic, but just don't bring any of that crap around here, right?
Yeah, but we can't put them right there because of this little bit of legislation. It's like,
exactly.
Darn.
Exactly. And I watched it happen right here in Denver with we had a mass of immigrants come into town, bust here, out of Texas and stuff, right? And we had thousands of them, and there were subsections of the city or districts in the city which were holding city council meetings where people were showing up going, we can't let them in here, as though there's border walls or built up in the streets or something. I mean, it's the silliest thinking. It becomes very territorial and very like cloistered and stuff. And this is a really big problem we have in America right now. Overall, totally separate from the cult problem, but worth mentioning.
Absolutely.
Because it features into how do we solve a lot of these problems? Well, we are barriered in solving them by this phenomenon. And
I think the way we solve these problems is broadening people's thinking, and the broadening the way people view, like the way people think about thinking. And it's or even acknowledging that you should probably think about thinking sometimes.
Right? It's fun to think about thinking. I do it all the time, but it's hard to get people to engage with that. Not everybody's there, or wants to be, and that's fine. I get it. Not everybody's interested in that, but it's particularly challenging by another factor of this whole mess, which is social media and the short attention span theater, right? And the conditioning of that. It's hard to communicate.
That's not a problem that any of our viewers that are watching right now have, because this is Debate Hub, and all we do is think about thinking and dumb things, and just all the time.
That's right.
You guys are better than everybody else.
Exactly. By the mere fact that you are here listening, you are part of the upper 10th of the upper 20th of the human species. Just so you know.
Facts.
Facts.
You have to end the sentence with facts. That's how you know it's true.
Totally.
We are at an hour-long mark, so
oh my God. All right, do we have to wrap up soon?
Yeah, we do got to start wrapping up. But do you have any last thoughts? Like, I think getting your
Yeah, let me wrap up what I was saying there, at least as far as the administration and stuff, just so we can finish this back on topic. I love this stuff. The Scientology is positioned right now better than it ever has been in many, many years because of this administration change. And let me please point out that Pam Bondi, the AG nominee that Trump has suggested, coming out of Florida, she was the Attorney General of Florida. She is in Scientology's pocket. And I don't say those words lightly. I'm not exaggerating or engaging in hyperbole right now. She has attended Scientology events. She has taken money from Scientology. She is a Scientology shill.
And Florida is like the Scientology state, right? Like that's like where Scientology really has a big base.
Florida, Clearwater specifically, is the location of Scientology's largest base of operations and money-making center of their empire. Yeah. And it is an empire. They have billions of dollars. I mean, it's not as big as the Moonies or, the Mormons or something, but it's pretty big. It's big enough in terms of money, not size of membership. Right. And their base of operations is in Florida. And for many, many, many years now, they have engaged in a practice that the church calls safe pointing. It's a church dogmatic policy to make good with politicians, law enforcement, mayors, city governments, right? Boards of, of influential companies, anybody who is actually the power figures in a community or area, Scientology will try to make inroads with and relationships with for their own ends. And it's rather obvious when they're doing it, but they still succeed at doing it. Pam Bondi, as the Attorney General for Florida, this was what they were doing, and they succeeded in spades with her. And I say all this because if she becomes the Attorney General of the United States, what world is it that you imagine that the government would ever in any way go after Scientology if the key law enforcement official of the administration is in Scientology's pocket? Right. If anything, we're afraid right now that over the next coming years, there could be legislation or judicial process through the AG office that could bolster Scientology legally.
And put them in a place where they're protected.
Yeah, and that's what I really wanted to say today, as far as like where things are at. Is I wanted, is kind of getting that's kind of, I guess, how we got off into politics and stuff, because I had to go there because
it's really involved.
It really is directly involved in Scientology's future right now. I'm not talking politics just to talk about it. It's actually really there as part of that.
Yeah, and understanding how the cult members and how the cult members are viewed very much changes how you're going to approach protesting or how you're going to vote or view these things in the future, especially if you don't know they're coming. If you don't know that this stuff is going on, you're never going to be able to do anything about it. And the fact that I think that there are a lot of people in America right now who believe that there is nothing they can do about anything right now, that the cards are, Trump's in charge now. Cards are going to fall wherever they're going to fall. And that's not necessarily the case.
Oh, no, it's not. There's, and let me say this also, because I've been saying this on my channel a lot recently, and I think it's an important thing to repeat. Now is not the time to be Chicken Little. The sky is not falling. We are not in last years of America or something. People who say crap like that have no idea what they're talking about. Right. We have a while. We have time to turn this course and change what's going on. The democracy still works. Everything's still happening. The power is still with the people. That's how it is right now. Yep. And now's not the time to lay on our back and go, well, nothing I can do about it. Yeah. No, get involved at the local level. You can't do it. You're right. You can't do anything about things at the federal level.
Not preemptively roll over for authority.
No, exactly. Don't roll over. Get involved. Be part of a group, because that's where the action is.
Join Debate Hub, where we talk about these things.
Yeah, exactly. Anyway, I'll stop preaching, but I just needed to say that stuff.
No, you're 100% correct, and I appreciate that. Go follow Chris. Go buy Chris's book. Links are in the description down below, as well as the pinned comment. But if you do have questions about Scientology, Chris is regularly talking about that on his channel, and you're still doing Q&As, aren't you, sometimes?
Every week, every Sunday, I do a Q&A show. Yeah.
So if you did have questions for Chris and had questions for Chris about Scientology or want to engage with him more, go and find him on his channel and go and ask. He's there. Go find him. I'm not going to be here anymore, though. He's a real boy. We're done here. Goodbye. Have a good day, everybody. Think about thinking more. We'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye.